But what is on the agenda today? Well, we are doing a two-parter this week and next week, going through Gift Day. And Miles has so aptly, despite the slide, laid out kind of what it's all about. But I'm going to be talking this week, and Mike's going to be talking next week from the passage really that is the key heart behind it, which is 1 John 3:16-18, that says, this is how we know what love is. Jesus Christ made a sacrifice for us, and from that sacrifice, he's called us to give to those in need through financial giving, money and possessions. And we're not just to love people with words and speech. We're not just to talk about it, but actually to do it. So we've called it Love in Action, because that's what it's about. And really that shapes not just the Gift Day, but Love Sydney and what we're doing for a lot of the second half of the year. It's not just talking about loving people, it's actually turning that into real things. But I'm really just talking about faith this morning, and I just want to bring some faith to Gift Day. And I'm speaking from probably the most famous passage in the Bible on faith, which is Leviticus chapter 19, verses 2-5. I'm kidding, right. Was anyone thinking, I should know what's in Leviticus, why don't I know? Okay, no, it's not. It's Hebrews chapter 11. If you're here and wouldn't call yourself a Christian, you're just visiting, just so you know, there's parts of the Bible that are more popular than others. And if someone tells you to start at Leviticus, don't. It's a great book, there's some powerful things in there, but there's other better places to start. But I'm speaking from Hebrews 11. And really, I'm talking about the relationship between faith and finance. And not just about this Gift Day, but hopefully for our finances in general. So it is specific to this kind of next few weeks. But I just want you to leave you with a challenge and a provocation that may think about how you reflect on your finances generally. And I want to do that by answering a key question, which is, how long is a piece of string? What's that, Miles? Twice as long as half its length. That's why he's an elder. He already knows the answer. But we'll explore it visually. So I'm wondering, Wes, can I throw it to you? And we'll see how far we can go around the room with it. You can pass it on to the next person. We'll try and go all the way back. Let's see how far we can go. Keep going. Yep, keep going. Yeah, keep going, Matt. Yeah, yep. Big noise, not a lot of distance, but... Okay, let's... Yeah. In my head, this was more fun, but it may take a little bit. We'll get round the room. Come on, Jamie. That's it. Okay. And just to say, whoever wraps this up at the end, you get to keep it. It's God's gift to you. It's God's grace shining through already. What a blessing. Oh, we're getting further than I thought. Okay. Do you think we're nearly halfway, or what's the deal, Richard? No, we've got a long way to go. Okay. I think once we get down here, you'll get the idea. That's how. It's long enough. Okay. Okay, there we are. I've run out of things to say to talk you through this process, so I'm just going to say that and hope that you laugh. Go for it, Ken. Big throw. Oh! Steve, you almost got hit on the head. Okay. Oh, you know what, Ruth? We'll stop with you. What a blessed woman. You get to keep it. Oh. So, listen, this is how long a piece of string is. And the illustration that I want to make through this is really quite simple. And I'm beginning to question whether it was worth it or not. But I'm going to reference it through the meeting, so here we are. But I want you to think of this piece of rope, which has gone all the way back around the room, as eternity. This is like the line. And I've cut a very small bit off already that you won't be able to see, but here it is in the palm of my hand. And I want this to represent the span of our lives. And this thing here is just tiny, and it's really insignificant when you compare it to the length of the whole thing. And what I want to talk about this morning is that I think that we need to be a people who are living for the dot, the whole line, and not just this bit. And I think that we get so caught up in the here and now and what's going on in the immediate that we forget the huge, big picture that's out there. We're called to be people who live in faith in the future, faith way, way above the here and now. So let me read that key passage and I'll pray and we'll get started. Hebrews 11:24-27 says this. By faith, Moses, when he had grown up, refused to be known as the son of Pharaoh's daughter. He chose to be mistreated along with the people of God rather than to enjoy the fleeting pleasures of sin. He regarded disgrace for the sake of Christ as of greater value than the treasures of Egypt, because he was looking ahead to his reward. By faith he left Egypt. Not fearing the king's anger, he persevered because he saw him who is invisible. And Jesus, we want to be a people who see him who is invisible. And we want to see you so clearly in our lives. And we don't want to be people who are actually trapped in the here and now in an unhelpful sense, Lord God, but we want to realize the size of the calling that you've given us, Lord God, the length and the scope of eternity. And we want to be people who invest everything we've got in the long game, Lord God. And that may mean making some sacrifices here and now, Lord God, but actually we're doing it because of the reward that we see before us. So I just pray for faith in this room and in this moment, Lord God. And Holy Spirit, I pray that above all, that you'd really speak to us, that you'd really ignite your word in our hearts, that it would come alive and it would change and transform us, that we would live in conformity with your word. In Jesus' name, amen. Okay, so there's a few simple questions that I want to answer. And the first is, what's faith and how does it operate? We're talking about faith this morning. You're already expressing faith by sitting on the chair that you're sitting on. I doubt when you went to sit on it, you did any science or equations or even checked whether it was stable, but you just sat on it and that's faith. And that's very reasonable faith too. I mean, I don't know if you've weighed yourself recently, but these chairs are built for people significantly heavier than you. You've probably sat in many, many chairs before and you've never had an issue. So you're expressing faith already, and we do it all the time. And biblical faith is an assurance of things unseen, that no matter what is going on, no matter what's happening around us, actually our faith has an object and we can believe in it. And our faith is in Jesus and who he says he is. That he's promised this, I believe in him. I think he's got integrity. I think he's got power. I think he's faithful. Therefore, no matter what's going on around, I believe that he is trustworthy. And our battle is that we spend our lives like living in the here and now. You know, we're busy with our assignments, our exams, voice conferences, meetings, spreadsheet, making lunches, babies, naps, turning up to site, building stuff, whatever it is. But actually, we're Christians who are called to live lives of faith, not just here and now in the immediate, but actually every difficulty, every challenge that we go through is an opportunity to step into faith and go, actually, even though this is hard, I believe that God is doing something in me. Romans 8 said, whatever we're going through right now, our present sufferings are nothing compared to the glory that will be revealed. Whatever's going on in this moment, it may be tough, but there's a much bigger picture, eternal picture out there, and we're to live with that eternal picture in mind. And not just in circumstances, but in terms of money too. You know, there's obviously, we've got bills to pay, we've got mortgages, we've got rent, we've got things that we need, we've got things that we say we need, but to be honest, we just want them. But we have to be people who aren't so caught up in the here and now and the stresses of what's going on, but live lives with an eternal picture. And when we think of faith, we often think of like receiving. You know, through faith I obtain or I get an answer. Through faith I can pray and I can see this person healed, or I can have God meet my needs or financially bless me. And those things are true to some degree, but faith is much bigger than that. In that same verse in Hebrews 11, it says this: women by faith received back their dead raised to life again. Go the women. By faith, they saw people come back from the dead. It's like, so by faith, if you like, they obtained a miracle, and that's incredible. But it goes on to say there were others who, by faith, were tortured, refusing to be released so that they might gain an even better resurrection. Especially saying some people saw amazing miracles by faith. They saw resurrections from the dead. Some people actually chose to die. They picked the option of suffering because they weren't going to deny who Jesus was to receive an even better thing than someone being raised from the dead, an even greater miracle. And in those verses we read about Moses, that's exactly what he was up to. Moses didn't obtain things. Moses refused to be known as the son of Pharaoh's daughter. He chose not to be prince. He chose to be mistreated rather than enjoying fleeting pleasure. Moses chose disgrace rather than all the treasure the world had to offer. Moses left Egypt. He turned his back on it all. He chose to side with a group of slaves committed to wandering around in the desert instead of all the wealth that Egypt had to offer him. But why did he make this decision? Because it's quite radical. Did he do it because he was essentially a really nice person, and that's what nice people do? They make tough decisions and big decisions, and he was a very humble guy, so maybe he thought, I should just go and be with my people. The sacrifice that Moses made was enormous. He was in Egypt. People still study Egyptian thought today because it was one of the greatest empires the world had ever seen, and it certainly was at that period of time. The sciences, the astrology, the construction, we still don't really know how they built the pyramids. The wealth of that nation is absolutely unbelievable. Right through the empires, through the Persians, through the Greeks, through the Romans, Egypt was always key. If you had Egypt, you had food. Because of the Nile Delta, they can produce harvests that are absolutely phenomenal. The wealth that was in this place was immense. There was nothing like it anywhere else. And Moses was like at the top social light setting. He was like so close to the Pharaoh. He had everything this world had to offer. Everything. And he chose to turn his back on all of it, on wealth that really is unimaginable to us. And he chose to live in abject poverty, to walk and to associate himself with the slave people, the very bottom. You don't make that kind of radical decision simply because you think you want to be a slightly nicer person. Moses had his eye on something so much bigger than that. It wasn't like that Egypt was bad necessarily. There was some good stuff there. Even the verses allude to the fleeting pleasures of sin, like it was pleasurable, it was nice, but he turned his back on it all because he saw something so much better. He saw an eternal, long-term picture. He saw the glory of Jesus. He saw him who was invisible. So making that sacrifice wasn't such a big deal in a sense, because he was making a sacrifice and it was hard, but in the long run, actually, he saw his reward and concluded, this is entirely worthwhile. Let me illustrate like this. If there's one thing that I don't eat, it's mushrooms. I don't eat mushrooms. I think I've told you this before. So if you invited me around to your house and you cooked mushrooms in a dish, I would consider that an act of hostility, at the least, perhaps just passive aggression. I don't eat mushrooms. But if you said to me, today, Hew, for lunch, you and your wife, Cindy, she loves mushrooms, and it's her birthday today, and she asked me to subtly mention that, so I have. I don't know if it was subtle, but brownie points accrued. If you said, today, you and your wife, I'm going to make you a delicious mushroom dish, and it's just fried mushrooms. I hate mushrooms. But they said, listen, if you eat that for the rest of your life, every meal that you have will be cooked for you and all paid for. There's a chef going to come and do it all for you. Will you eat the mushrooms? What's the answer? I would hate the half an hour or whatever it is, but I would give it a go. I think even worse is slugs for me. I hate slugs. That's there's no more animal that I'm afraid of than slugs. And even as I practiced this illustration, I was gagging. But it's cool enough here. If you gave me a plate of slugs cooked or raw, who cares? They're terrible. Would I eat them? It's like, it would be horrible. I'd probably be sick numerous times. But listen, what I'm trying to say is, for the sake of short-term suffering, I believe that it's worth enduring because I've seen something so much better. Life can be tough and it can be hard and it can be difficult, but it's worth going through them if you have a bigger picture, if you've got an eternal view, if you're living for the line and not just the dot. I can endure that suffering because I believe by faith in something so much bigger. Someone has promised me something. They said, hey, if you do that, you will get this. You're going to be faithful to your promise. If you're going to deliver on that, then I'm going to be willing to go through it. So Moses turned his back on something, on really the life that many of us would love to lead, because he'd seen something so much better. And if you like, it wasn't a sacrifice for him anymore because he was so enamored by what was before him. Hebrews 11 says this in verse 3. Talking about the heroes of faith, all these people were still living by faith when they died. They did not receive the things they were promised. They only saw them and welcomed them from a distance, admitting that they were foreigners and strangers on earth. People who say such things show that they are looking for a country of their own. If they'd been thinking of the country they had left, they would have had opportunity to return. Instead, they were longing for a better country, a heavenly one. Therefore, God is not ashamed to be called their God, for he has prepared a city for them. These heroes of faith, they died and they hadn't seen everything that they were looking for. But they were longing, hoping for a better home. If you like, they were aliens and strangers. They saw themselves as pilgrims heading towards a destination. They weren't living for the dot, they were living for the line. They were believing for something so much better. Therefore, they made huge sacrifices in order to obtain it. And even Jesus says to us in Matthew, he says, "Do not store up for yourselves treasures on earth where moths and vermin destroy and where thieves break in and steal, but store up for yourselves treasures in heaven where moths and vermin do not destroy, where thieves do not break in and steal. For where your treasure is, there your heart is also." Jesus isn't saying treasure's a bad thing, you should never go for it, it's not good. He's not saying that at all. He's saying the opposite, actually. He's saying just think about where you're going to store it up. You can store it up here, but once it's spent, it's gone and you're never going to get it back. Or you can forgo and you can store it up in eternity where it's never going to spoil, it's never going to fade, it's going to last forever and ever and ever. Moses was able to do it because his heart wasn't in Egypt. He was able to leave that behind because his heart was somewhere else. His treasure was somewhere else. It was in the promises of God. And as we think about our finances, we've got to think, well, where's my heart really at? Where am I really investing into? What's the long-term perspective for me? Am I just going to go for everything that this world says is good, for the pleasures that this world has to offer, for the security that finance can afford me, etc., etc.? Or am I going to believe for a picture that's so much bigger and so much greater? Am I going to invest wisely in eternity? You may think long-term planning is 30, 40 years. What about 400 billion years? What about planning actually for long term? And I think it's really important that we consider this motivation. Moses wasn't told just to be a nice person and to give up stuff, because that's what being a nice person is all about. And I think actually when we're thinking about gift day, I don't want you to give because someone's emotionally manipulating you, or with your money generally, because that's what Christians do. Christians are nice people, and we reduce a Christian down to someone who's a little bit nicer than they were before they became a Christian. Because all we're trying to do is just trying to improve ourselves a little bit, and that gets like a little bit tiring, and it gets a little bit hard. We've got to be people who have a much grander picture than that. That we're not just trying to be better people. Actually, we're people who have seen an entirely better way of life. That we're living for a picture that's much bigger than ourselves. We're living for the length of the line and not the dot. And for those who were there last week at the combined service we had, there were two words that I felt were really quite significant for us as a church. And actually not the kind of words that you'd expect at a combined service. You know, when we're all together having fun, they were a little bit rebukey, if you like, rather than, nice, encouraging, uplifting stuff. And which surprised me, but Steve, his word in particular, he talked about God wanting to bring to life stuff in us. And he challenged us for where we're apathetic, or where we can be critical, or where we can neglect spiritual disciplines. And Anne Broadbent was talking about also a reignition, if you like. She was saying it was like a dusty book, and there was dust all over it. And I was thinking about what these words meant for us as a church and for me, and both of them were talking about there's a kind of a deadness, there's a dustiness, and I associate dust with inactivity. Like a book is dusty because no one's reading it. But actually I was thinking of biblical references for this, that dustiness isn't always connected actually with inactivity, quite the opposite. If you go and read Isaiah 1, the people were really busy doing stuff for God. They were making sacrifices and worshipping Him. But God's just like, they mean nothing to me, all of your sacrifices, all the festivals that you're undertaking, you're keeping the Sabbath. I can't bear it any longer. You're trampling my courts. He literally says, I hate the worship that you're giving me. And it was because their worship was tick box exercise. It was like the minimum we can do to make God happy, devoid of any real relationship with Him. Revelation chapters 2 and 3, the 7 letters to the churches. He says to the Ephesian churches, you guys are working really hard. There's no dust on you. You're persevering. You're actually enduring great hardship. But the thing I have against you is that you've forgotten to love me in it all. And I was thinking, man, both of those guys were really busy, but in a sense, their hearts were really dusty because they were just doing stuff for God, but they weren't really connecting with him. And I was thinking about the two words that Anne and Steve brought, and I was wondering really if it's not that we're not doing stuff. Maybe we are really busy as a church. I certainly feel that. But maybe there's like a kind of a heart thing in us that we've lost. Maybe if like our hearts have become dusty. And I would so often put that down to when we reduce Christianity to moralism and just looking like we need to be nicer people and try a little bit harder, because that soon becomes exhausting and tiring. And you get apathetic, and you get critical, and you get judgmental, and you forget those spiritual disciplines, because all they are is disciplines. There's no joy in them anymore because they're devoid of relationship. And I was just wondering if God was saying something to us, like he wants to restore a real heart for him in us as a people, to come alive again, not just to perform and just to be nice people, but just to open our eyes up to the glory of eternity and who he really is, that we would see him who is invisible, and our whole lives would be directed towards him and him alone. That we're happy to make some sacrifices and we're happy to do the work, not just because we're trying to be better, but because our eyes have been lifted from ourselves and the immediate onto the glory of eternity. And maybe there's just a rekindling in us. And I think that particularly for Gift Day, like I don't just want you to feel like, oh, okay, now it's time to give again. We give every year. What do I need to give? And you get on and give something. I want you to be motivated by faith, real faith, that actually you're investing in your own eternity. But far more than that, you're bringing the love of God into the world around us that they so desperately need to receive. It's not about you being a better person or validating your consciences. It's about investing our hearts into eternity. So the next question then I want to ask is how should we give? Like Moses, if you like, he walked away from everything in Egypt and completely changed course. Should we do the same thing? Should we sell everything? Should we give everything away? What should we do? Well, Paul says this in 1 Timothy 6, verses 17 to 19. He said, command those who are rich in this present world to what? To tithe? To give a little bit more at the gift day? No, he doesn't say that. He says to not be arrogant, nor to put their hope in wealth, which is so uncertain, but to put their hope in God, who richly provides for us everything for our enjoyment. So he commands those who are rich. You may think, well, I'm certainly not a rich person, that's not me. But actually, when we compare ourselves on the global picture, we are rich. Even if you don't have much cash in your bank account right now and you may not own a house, but we live in a wealthy nation and we get the benefits of that. So we have beautiful parks and public showers and public toilets and national parks. And even if you're not in a position to pay tax, you get the benefit of everyone else's tax, the roads, Medicare, all those things. We have access to homes and running water. Actually, these are luxuries compared to the rest of the world. We get education for pretty much free. And even if you didn't get your education for free, you chose to pay for it. Well, that's even more so. Even though you could have had it for free, you chose to pay for it. We are all rich people in the scheme of things, even though you may not necessarily feel like it. And how are the rich to give? Well, Paul says, I don't want you to be arrogant. I don't want you to get conceited. And I think what he means there is, when you've got stuff, it gives you options. Like James says, he says, now listen to you who say, today or tomorrow we'll go out to this or that city, we'll spend a year there, we'll carry on business and make money. Well, you don't even know what will happen tomorrow. What is your life? You're a mist that appears for a little while and vanishes. And it's like with our money gives us a sense of independence and we can make our own decisions. Hey, where am I going to live? Or what job should I go for? Or what course should I take? And Paul's saying, listen, I just don't want you to be arrogant and independent. I want you to understand that your life is a mist and give from that place. He says to them, Paul says, in continuing that passage in Timothy, he says, command them to do good, to be rich in good deeds, and to be generous and willing to share. In this way, they will lay up treasures for themselves as a firm foundation for the coming age, so that they may take hold of the life that is truly life. He said, with everything that you've got, don't be conceited or gain an unhelpful sense of independence. But actually, I want you to be rich in good deeds, to be generous and willing to share. You don't necessarily have to give everything, sell everything, we'll be homeless, but I want you to be rich in good deeds. And I want you to live your life in a completely different way, that you will lay up treasures for yourselves as a firm foundation for the coming age. This is taking hold of life that is truly life. There's a lot of people who say a lot about what life is. Is it having a house? Is it having a boat? Is it being financially independent or mortgage-free? Is it having this kind of a job as opposed to this kind of job? This education is that education. If I have this, will I be stress-free? There's a lot of stuff that's life. But he's saying, what I want you to do is be generous. I want you to lay a firm foundation for the coming age. And that is true life. Moses walked away from a kind of a fake version of life that maybe for a while may make you happy, but he's saying lay a firm foundation for this life and in the next. Be rich and be generous. And I want to challenge us with our finances. And I'm not just talking gift day, I'm talking generally really, to be a people who look to lay a foundation for the coming age. Martin Luther, the famous Christian thinker, said this. He said, God gave us fingers so that money would slip through them. John Wesley said that money never stays with him. It would burn me up if it did. I throw it out of my hands as soon as possible, lest it should find its way into my heart. That was a man who could have amassed huge wealth. He was a leader of a massive church movement. But he vowed to take basically nothing to his grave and gave it away as quickly as he could because he didn't want to ever get into his heart. You can only make that kind of sacrifice in faith in what God will be doing in the future. And it's not just about us giving into eternity. I think if we want to be a city-shaping church, we want to live in a way that's going to be so cultural and absolutely radical that causes people to take note. I think with our money, if we can just be so unselfish and completely generous in a way that totally baffles and confuses people, but yet they get to be recipients and blessed by it, it will change the city. And I don't think we'll ever be a city-shaping church without kind of getting this into our thinking, actually. I think what we do with our money is going to speak way more than necessarily what we say in the pulpit to the public. I think how we give into some of the neediest, most poorest, broken things within our city is going to actually speak volumes about the sincerity of our faith. To be a city-shaping church, we're going to have to be a people who learn to live by faith and give by faith, loving some of the poorest and investing actually in our eternal future, not being caught up in life, fake life over here, but laying a foundation for a long and eternal life over here. So if we could have the band up, I'd just like to conclude. I've said it already, but I'm speaking about gift day, but actually it's my heart for our finances generally, really, that we would be a people who live by faith. Live by faith in the sense that we trust God to meet our needs on a daily basis, but live by faith that every decision that we make is seen in the context of eternity. I would like to be a person that's, in a sense, turned my back on the value system within this world and is living for a completely different value system over here. I would love to be more that person. And I would love to be part of a church that's actually giving outrageously and generously to the people who are in need around us. Not because we're called to be nice people, but we've been captivated by something so much bigger and something so much more exciting that we've seen him who is invisible. And so I would just want to challenge you to go home and to think about it. What does it mean for you personally and your family to actually give by faith, not just in this gift day, but generally? And actually to really invest, not just in the dot, the immediate, but invest in the line. And I would consider that a very smart investment. We've got an opportunity to be investing in eternity every day, to be laying up a firm foundation for ourselves. And let's be people who make that decision.